Okay, so hello everyone, this is Riddhi, and today I'll be uh, taking you through some of the information regarding Pune Splunk user group. And you can join our group with the link provided. And so, Vikram, which you were asking sometimes back, so this is the Slack link. And the same group you can use for involving yourself in any of the question answer session. And the very big and major thing, we are recording this session, so anyone who have missed it or want to go through it again, so he and she can always log into Splunk user group and check the materials. Also, please don't forget to fill up the feedback from like after the end of session. We also need your input for the scope of improvement. And last but not the least, it's very important to do the RSVP of any event if you want to join. And now I'm inviting so he is Thomas.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for attending today. I'll just get my screen shared with PowerPoint presentation. So, hi. Thank you very much for attending. Just double checking. Yep, we can see we've got any problems. So, first of all, before we go any further, how I like to kind of do presentations, if there's any, so like this is a user group, this is a way where I'm going to be presenting an app today called SPL Rehab. If there's any questions that you've got along the way, please just go and stop me and shout out and ask questions if you want to. If there's any questions in chat, if someone else wants to read that out, then that's absolutely fine as well. Don't feel as though you have to wait until the end to ask any questions. And this is much of me showing you an app that I've gone and developed as it is you an opportunity to advise and feedback on any features that you feel that you would like to see that are not already in there, and clarify anything along those lines as well. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So first of all, this was originally a presentation given for Conf 19 last year. The app's been updated a little bit since then, but the PowerPoint presentation, which isn't particularly long, is going to be fairly familiar if anyone's seen that. Now, my name is Tom West. On this presentation as well is my colleague, James Odom. He's not going to be presenting today. Typically, it's just me that does this presentation. However, he had the joyous benefit of going to .conf in Vegas to do this because I was expecting a baby, so gave him the free ticket to Vegas. So he did a great job in my absence in giving this presentation. A little bit about me, as mentioned already, I am a Splunk Trust member. I am a solutions architect for Convergent Data, or as we're now known as Hippo Digital. We're based in the middle of the UK. We do a lot of work, mainly around healthcare. I've done an awful lot of work, certainly with the NHS this year on the whole COVID pandemic. And we get involved in some really interesting, unique challenges and ways to use Splunk, as well as the usual cybersecurity practices as well. On top of that, I'm now also a member of the Big Data Beard. So if anyone has keeping an eye on what's coming up with .conf this year, or even last year, you may have noticed that last year there was an RV that was traveling around America in about as not straight way as you could do. And doing interviews along the way, splunking all the data as they went. This year we're doing something called the road trip to, not the road trip, we're doing the virtual race to Conf, where we have splunked all the data from 10 races on iRacing, and we'll be broadcasting those every day up until Conf. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm not giving any forward-looking statements in this, so I think we're okay. So SBL Rehab, what it is, it's an idea that I came up with to try and make fixing any search problems a lot easier. Now, kind of before we go to there, I guess the first question is, so what's the problem? If you come up with if you run a search and you have a problem with it, if you're someone like me that writes pretty complex searches, you'll end up running it, you'll come up with a problem, you'll end up having to delete X amount of commands to a point where you know that the search runs and you are confident in those results. You'll run it, you'll check those, confirm they're right, and then you'll reinsert almost a line by line at a time and repeat, almost like a debug process. And it kind of made me think, so like if you use any sort of programming language, any programming tools, usually there's a debug process out there that you can take advantage of that will allow you to step through in a structured and safe manner. And I didn't feel as though there was with Splunk. There are obviously tools out there that can do and help find problems with your searches. The main one obviously being the job inspector that I know that everyone is maybe aware of and loves. Lots of a big table with lots of numbers that mean nothing to most people. So it isn't the most friendly. It's not the most useful of tools for people that, like me at the time, was quite a beginner in terms of running searches. I guess a bit of background as well is I've actually only been using Splunk since middle of 2018 and didn't get any formal training really until March, April 2019, at which point SBL Rehab had pretty much been written already, just because it was a way that I could find to debug searches and a use case to develop myself as well. The other way that we can try and have a look and see more information about our searches is through the search.log, which is within the search, within the job inspector, we have an option at the top to open the search.log, and we can see the information in there, which is even more of a minefield. So I kind of thought, you know what, there's got to be an app for that, and was surprised to find that there really kind of wasn't. There was a few things on Splunk base. Obviously, that's a good place to go and check, but there wasn't anything that really kind of stood out as being that will solve the problem that I'm trying to solve. So started on commuting to and from work to actually go and create one. And the ideas were it had to be easy to use, needed to be free to download, needed to be compatible with Splunk Cloud. I wanted to give it a visible roadmap, and I wanted to make sure it was supported. And this was a snapshot taken actually quite a while ago of the app on Splunk base. These screenshots and the numbers have kind of increased a little bit since then, but typically it's not really morphed much from that. And so what does it do? It is a controlled process for stepping through the search. That was number one. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to replicate a debug mode within an SPL, within a search in Splunk. I wanted to make sure that you could view the results in a way that you would feel most benefits your use case. And because we're looking at just generically debugging searches, that could be anything. Your search could look completely different, as it does when you just run a search in the search screen. You either see the events in event format, you see a chart, you can see a table. So what would be most useful? And so what I wanted to do was make sure that you had the option, whether you wanted to view it in event form, tabular form, or field summary format. And wanted to still make sure that you could see those overall results stats, because you might not necessarily be given the joyous no results found screen. You might actually have some data that you kind of question, you're not entirely sure about. So being able to see the overall results of your original search versus what you are running as far as debug goes was another goal. And then to try and make it a bit easier to understand what was coming out from the job inspector. So a few performance metrics in there, and also for anyone that's gone and done any sort of Splunk professional services or the advanced searching and reporting course, you may have come across the term called LISPy, and I wanted to make sure that that was quite clear as to what the LISPy was for the search. And I'll cover Lispy in a bit more information if you've never come across it before. And that is death by PowerPoint right there. So SPR Rehab demo. So I'll take you into the demo, and if you are a Splunk admin or you've written your own dashboard and you open up this dashboard and you see that one of the panels hasn't worked quite correctly. This is apologies for the very crude put together dashboard. The environment that I usually use, I've done a good and managed to lock myself out of it. So thanks to the big data beard, we still have a Splunk environment with lots of data to use. So we'll piggyback off of that. And we've got a dashboard put together. We've got two panels. One is giving us information and the other one has no results found. And usually at this point, you would probably go and try and open it up in search and see what's going on. So we would look at that. Sorry, are there any?
Yeah. Tom, could you zoom in slightly? So
sure.
Just a little small, thanks.
Is that any better?
Much, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I apologize. I forget that I'm on a ginormous screen. Anything like that, again, please feel free. I guess, are there any questions at the moment? Nope. Okay, so yeah, you would probably at this point have a look and go, so what's this dashboard trying to do? If you don't know what it is, then we could have a look. We could see, okay, well, we're looking at iRacing. The one with data, looking at iRacing, and it's just trying to get some basic data from iRacing and just do a count on those records to see whether we actually have any data. So we can check this search here. We can see, yeah, we've got some data. We're all good. And then we can check this one and actually notice that this line, the main search here is the same. So we know that we should have some events, and there's clearly a problem here. This is obviously quite a simplistic example, but we can see that we've got a few lines. Now we would have to go through and actually understand, have a look through the data, see which line is broken, or the new way, which is just going into SPR Rehab. So I can open up SPR Rehab. And first of all, it opens up a dashboard called user searches. And this pretty much just mimics the query that we get if we go into activity and jobs. Except it's just a little bit more easier to read as far as your searches go. And we can see that we've got two separate searches. We've got the two that we actually ran from the dashboard. We can see we've got the one that we know works and the one that we know we may have issues with. So we can just select this right here. This will open up the main SPL Rehab dashboard. And whilst this search breakdown is loading, here we go. So first of all, we're presented with the search along the top, and this is something that we can edit when as we go through. So we're not tied into just actually having a look at the search and then having to go to another screen, edit the search, and then reopen again. We can edit the search directly within this input here. We've got a time picker that we can use, and this is set to the time range that was originally executed with the search. And we've got this option here for the theme, which I'll come back to. And we've got overall search stats, which at the moment is just giving us one option, which is for overall performance statistics. And then we've got a table, and this table here confirms we've got 6 commands for this search, and we can see the actual result count for each of these commands. So the first, which is the initial search, we've got 1,956 records, and we know that this is about right in terms of well, at least we know we've got records because we've checked that with the previous search, and we know that we've got some things coming through. We can then have a look through, and at this point where we've got this stats command, it's given us no records. So we know we don't need to investigate any further. The issue straight away has to be in either lines 1, 2, 3, or 4. It can't be 5 or 6 because we know at that point there are no records. So the first thing that we can do is we can select. Well, we can have a look at the stats command. So stats minimum fuel as bin fuel, and we know that this eval here is evaluating 100. Not in, and specifically, this line here is looking for evaluating fuel at the fuel field. So we can look and see if we've got a fuel field. We don't. And we can check down here. We can see lots of information, but we don't have fuel. So that there would be an alarm bell for me. We online it's actually a rename. And at any point, and it confirms what search we are running whenever we're selecting here. We can have a look again at the field analysis, and we know that we're not going to have fuel. But do we have fuel level percentage? And we do. So we know, but on closer inspection, what we can see is that we've forgotten to capitalize something, because Splunk for field names needs to be it's case sensitive. So fuel level percentage, fuel, and then we've got a lowercase l rather than an uppercase L. So we can go onto there. We can find that in the search, which is going to be here. Update that with the L. Run that again. And before this is, there we go. We can now actually see that we've got a result that's gone all the way through, and we can see that we actually have something at the end of it. And we can have a look at the overall result stats, and we can see that, which was an option that wasn't there before, and we can confirm we've got one result for this search. It's oops, it's my fault for clicking too much. Go back in, take there with an L. So what happens when you try and speed things through? You know what? Let's refresh. And I guess the other question is, can everybody still hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
We can hear you.
That's good. Unfortunately, one of the side effects, I think, with everyone working from home, certainly from where I live, is that the internet every now and then doesn't work, which is always a slight problem when you're trying to do a presentation remotely. Right, so this should now actually be running. Let's let it actually run, confirm its thing, and then we'll carry on. But in essence, what that panel is supposed to show is your overall results statistic, your overall results. So what that actual final value was. If there's time associated with the data, you'll see a time chart, and you'll see a field summary as well for your final results. Just so that you can see exactly what that's like. I suspect this. Well, I know this environment's not the fastest, and I think they it may be struggling with other things going on at the moment, unfortunately. But we can move on from there. If I go and update that search within the dashboard, we found this. We now got the value of 32 P days. We now have a fixed dashboard, and it didn't take particularly long. And whilst for a very simple search, it would probably be quicker to do the manual debug, especially if it's your own search. That amount of time that took wouldn't really be much different whether it's a 6-line command or a 60 or a command. It doesn't really make much difference because that table is going to be there where there are no results, picking up and seeing where that value is a problem. So even if you get this dreaded "I'm thinking about it, I'm not doing anything" screen that we've got right now, which is always nice, at least the main thing, like, as table will appear that will say, okay, this is where you need to have a look. And unfortunately, demo. I need to appease demos indeed. The demo gods rarely fail me, but today it seems as though they're getting their own back because I've just come back from holiday. Like, you've had too much of a relaxing time. There we go. So we've got the overall result stats. We can see what the values are and everything here. But the main thing is we've got some statistics that will load, do its thing. Now the other part as well, whenever we're doing a debug, is that we do have some extra information. We don't want to see the final fields. We just want to gauge what we've got these information, and we can view these performance statistics. We can select this panel here, and it will show some performance metrics, events, EPS. We've got the duration that search took, a breakdown of commands, which commands were used. This is particularly useful if you are using searches with macros, because you can you see all the individual commands that were executed within the macro, which is quite handy to see. Things such as input-output analysis and the search performance, which gives you an idea of how long it took to package the search, send that search query the TS-IDX files, and then actually apply that all the knowledge objects to the raw data. So it just gives you that in a tabular format rather than having to do any sort of calculations with data that's in the job inspector, which is quite handy, quite useful. And you don't have to do this on the breakdown. You can also do this on the overall. So if you are actually not looking at trying to find out where there's a problem within a search from a results perspective, but actually you may have something that's more performance related, then you can have these two panels running side by side where you can see what your results look like versus the performance statistics side by side, which again is quite handy and quite useful. The other thing as well is I've touched around theme. Now, not everyone likes a dark theme. I kind of find that the reception with dark theme is it's either people love it or they hate it. So we added different themes. So whether you want mint, flame, 49ers, I'm a NFL fan and kind of follow the 49ers, so that's getting added in. And because I live in a place called Sheffield, that's where they're currently filming Doctor Who, so I added the TARDIS, but I'm not selecting that one because that will burn your eyes. So if I go to mint, for instance, it will automatically refresh the whole look of the dashboard, and just if you prefer this kind of style, then you can use this. But what's also quite nice about the styling is if I open up this search screen, go into SBL Rehab, so there's no way that anything could have been passed across. This is an entirely different dashboard, but you'll notice that it already loads with mint, whereas beforehand it loaded with with dark theme, and that's just because we store the value that you select for your user account against the theme drop down, whether it's in this dashboard or in the Rehab dashboard, and it will then retheme all the app so that it's per your choice. So if you like the mint theme and the person sat next to you prefers something more like flame or likes the dark theme, then they will get that. You will get the theme that you prefer, because it's not something you're going to want to change every time. You're not using this to have a look at a pretty dashboard. You're using this app to try and find problems in your searches. But it just adds an extra layer that makes it easier for you to read if there's a particular theme that you just can't get on with. So that's really why that's in there. And that's all done just with some CSS. So there's no reloading of the dashboard or any queries or anything along those lines. It's just CSS values changing behind the scenes. And Nickit is definitely the man to go to for more information about how all that stuff goes. In fact, actually, I think he's got a pretty cool session at .conf coming up about all that stuff as well. So that's pretty much it as far as the app goes. I did mention the Lispy, which is just right here. And what this is actually intended to show is what's been queried against the indexer. So how gives you a really good idea as to what data you're querying for on the indexer and how fast your search might actually be. And it kind of highlights a few things. Any index time fields, you can see what they are pretty easily, and that we know things like source index, they're index time fields, and so we can see if we look at the actual query, we've got index equals iRacing, index : iRacing. That's what gets sent through to the indexer. That's what's going to be queried. Source is normalized race, but then we've got session unique ID equals 3, and we don't see that. All we see is and 3. And that's because the indexer doesn't know what session unique ID, what that field is. That's a search time field extraction. So you will just see 3 there. Lispy is showing what's queried against the indexer itself. And then we've got 4 or 5. So we can see 4 or 5 there as far as the session state goes. And then we've got this the host is not Splunk 2. And so we can see in bracketed here, we've got a not host is Splunk 2. And again, this is quite useful because it kind of highlights that what it's going to do first is it's going to apply, look for values based on here. And once we've got there, then it has to then check whether its host is not equal to Splunk 2. So adding nots onto things does slow down searches quite significantly. And the last one is that player car position is greater than 0, and we're not seeing 0 anywhere, and that's because we can't do any sort of filtration on 0. Or player car position for that matter. We have to get that data back from the indexer, and then we have to go and apply that piece of logic afterwards, which is quite useful. And certainly once you understand how Lispy plays a part in searches and how you can interpret it to make your searches faster, then that's a really, really useful thing to be able to do. A few other things that are worthwhile calling out on here: if you are someone that knows a lot about the search.log and there may be something in there you're looking to take advantage of, then this will basically convert every single line into a chart. You can highlight over all of it, but it also goes and shows any spikes in time. So if there's anything particularly on here that may be useful to do with time, then this will give you that. And then we've got this command performance. If anyone uses joins, appends, subsearches, all those kind of things, then this chart here becomes very, very useful, especially when it comes to educating other people on why you shouldn't use joins, because it's showing the total result, so the duration each command took and what the result count is. And it's basically just a graphical representation of these two columns here. But for any join, so typically what you would expect to see is the first command took quite a long time, and then every command after that is pretty quick. accepting joins and things like that, where you will see a huge spike usually for those. And it's quite interesting when you come across one of those searches to be able to see it. And then this count of commands is exactly the same as what I called down further below as well. So it will expand any commands within macros, so you can see everything that's been executed. When you're looking at huge searches, that's quite useful. That is pretty much it from the performance side of things as well. I guess a few things to be aware of. One, there is a lot going on with this dashboard, and therefore there are a lot of searches. If you've got anything in place within your environment that checks how many, like you may have standards that will fail dashboards if they have certain, like if they exceed certain amount of searches or something like that, then this will probably fail it. Because I think last count was around 15 searches, which isn't ideal, but every time you open up this dashboard, you won't be executing 15 searches, certainly not all at once, because what it goes and does is it will only run the searches that are actually relevant for your use case at the time, at any time. So when you initially load it up, it's going to load up the search that you'd originally executed, and it'll use something called load job to do that as quickly as possible. So it'll just reload that search job. And it will, and as soon as it's gone and loaded that one search, then it will then almost kind of tell the dashboard, I've reloaded the initial search. Now you can go and run whichever other searches that you want to do, and it uses tokens to do this. So it will, if you've created a dashboard that has inputs, you may see that your searches, your panels at the start will have a red warning marker and say search is awaiting input, and that's because the token associated with that input hasn't been set yet. And we do something very similar here in terms of having a token that is just not set. So that tells the dashboard it's that the search is there, but it can't be run because it's still waiting for some information. And that information is just that we don't want to run that search. So that limits the load on the on the box quite significantly. I think the most amount of searches that run at any one time is, I think it's 6. But that's when you are going down to actually look at debugging the searches. And even then it kind of tries to step through, because it will make sure that any searches that need to get performance information are prioritized. They will run first. As soon as they've gone and executed, any other supporting searches will run afterwards. So we've not got a skewed performance figure that's not looking as good because we're running like 5 other searches at the same time. That's not really helpful. So that's what's going on there. The other thing as well to be aware of is knowledge objects. If you're looking at someone else's search, you could have issues trying to debug someone else's search if they're using private knowledge objects. There are 3 levels of search of sharing any sort of artifacts. Really are global, app, and private. We can get away with app and global. Global means that, say, any field aliases, extracted fields, that kind of thing, they're just available for everyone, no matter which app you're in. App means that those artifacts are available for anyone within that app, providing you've got the right level, user level. Obviously, if they're only being shared at admin level, at a power user level, then that's something else. But from a location standpoint, you've got global, app, and private. If it's private and you're using private field knowledge objects, then it's only going to be yourself that's able to successfully debug the search, and that's kind of something that would happen regardless of whether you're using SPL Rehab or not. App, the way that this app goes and handles any app permissions, though, we notice that whenever we access SPL Rehab, it's within the SPL Rehab app, but selecting a search. So I can select this one. We can see we've got the app is SPL Rehab. It's actually going to open up this Rehab dashboard within the app that the search was originally executed. So in this case, we were looking at debugging a search that's within the Virtual Race to Conf development app. So that is what the debug That's what the Rehab dashboard's been opened up within, and that then gives us access to all those those knowledge objects that are shared at app level, which is quite useful and quite handy, and is one less thing to have to worry about. So that's how it goes and does that. But it does mean that there are some global knowledge objects associated with this app as well. So if that's something that's kind of a concern for people, then it's just to be aware of that. The main one being that the Python script that's associated with this table also needs to be set to global. And that Python script does two things. One is it actually goes and splits the command by pipe into each individual line, but it also will understand whether that is whether that whether that pipe is within regex, within a quote, within a subsearch, join, something like that. And if it's not, and the other thing as well is that it will then go, once it's going to split down those searches in a line by line format, it will then execute each one of those lines as a separate search, but it will reload the previous one. So that's the other thing that the Python search does. So kind of giving you the information from here, it will run this search just as this, and that's how it gets the duration and the result count. Once it's done that, it will reload this search, but it'll execute that line, and then it will reload these two lines and execute that line to try and minimize the impact that this process has on your indexes. But it's just an indicator of what's going on behind the scenes and why it does need to be a Python script rather than something that's just done within SBL. And back to the PowerPoint presentation, we've covered global permissions and searches. We've covered dashboard tokens. So kind of the takeaways is troubleshooting Splunk searches can be difficult, can be time consuming, and it can be fairly challenging, especially if you've got multiple problems within your search. But the SBL Rehab app is available. You can download it right now. It's available on Splunk Base. You can follow this link here or just Google SBL Rehab, and that'll take you straight to Splunk Base. We do have a roadmap that's on Trello. It does need updating, but any input, feedback, please feel free to jump on there and add any suggestions as you feel fit. And you can check out convergingdata.com for further information about what we've been doing internally as well. Are there any questions?
Yes, Thomas. Abhishek here. My question is more about.
I can see a question in a chat window. So.
Okay, you want to address that?
Sorry, is a question in the chat window?
There's already one in the chat. Yeah.
Cool.
What's the logic behind to show overall performance stats?
The logic to provide overall performance stats. So that one. So there's a few separate searches. I'll just go and reshare my screen. Present now the entire screen. Yep. Is there a particular panel that we're looking for?
The question was by Mohammed Rafiq. You want to add detail?
Yes, Tom. The page which we were showing that, it was showing that overall, the tab which you have hide performance tab at the top.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. When you click on that, it will show the overall performance tab. So basically, what is the logic behind this to show us that whether it found this many record and whether it is correct or it's having a green signal or a red signal as is showing on that panel?
So the performance stats originally are taken from the so when you initially load this dashboard up, it's going to reload the search that was originally executed. So it uses a command called load job. Off the back of there, one of the REST, I believe it's one of the REST calls onto Splunk will get you all the information. It's anything that you see within the Splunk UI. If we go spec, it's actually just a REST call, and this is just tabling out data based on that REST call to Splunk. So we just use the same query that is that's from that REST call, and we get that.
Right, if you're not
we just
talking,
display that
please go
information.
on mute. There's a lot of background noise. Thank you.
Yeah, so we show, we run a REST call, which will get us the because we've got the job ID. And there's a REST endpoint against Splunk. I can link all the REST endpoints are in the docs. Those out. But basically, within REST, there's a lot of information, and this is kind of all pulled out of there. It looks very similar to what you see in the job inspector. So there's a certain field called is open up the hey, there you go. Yeah, so we're running services, search jobs, and then the job ID, and we are tabling out the fields that we're interested in, and we're calculating EPS. Is that already out straight from the REST call? No, it's not. Yeah, it's the scan count divided by the duration. Yeah. So and that's what we show in for EPS. Other things like Lispy is kind of an interesting one, because Lispy, that comes from the search.log, which is accessed also via REST, and so we get the data of the search.log, then we have to basically convert it to a multi-value field, and we then go and use some regex to identify that's the field. That's the actual Lispy within the search. From there.
Thank Tom.
Okay, we have one more question from Abhishek. It's related to SDK.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Rohit. This is Abhishek, Tom. So
Hi.
my question is specific to the searches which generally take place through the Splunk SDK, especially when these calls are made from Splunk SDK for Python or say C#. So when it is happening on a frequent basis, we do observe a lot of performance issues. So does this app also help address those kind of searches? Is there a
Good
direct
question.
connection, or we can check that out?
I guess what you're really looking for there is the first thing is it depends what type of search you're using. If you're interacting with the SDK and you're running, say, a one-shot search, you're not necessarily going to get a search ID, so you're not going to be able to use it for those. I guess really what I would suggest in that use case is, rather than, this would kind of be like using using a hammer to crack a nut. You probably can do something you can use something quite smaller. I would recommend having a look at this particular section of the dashboard, and if there's certain metrics that you think actually that would be very useful for our own individual use cases, then just to take those as what you would use. So for instance, if we look at search performance, this particular one, open up the search, and we can see what REST call is being called. Now, providing that you've got a job ID, you could take advantage of the exact same job, the same call, get this information out, and you can view it however you need them. But I believe the SDK will also provide its own set of performance information.
Sure. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions?
Tom, I had one. I saw that in one part of your dashboard, you had a tip about using feeds, structured feeds. Is that a static implementation? Is something you have
well, it was something that if your queried fields are extracted at index time, I think it is dynamic, so it's only going to appear sometimes. From memory, it's when you have a like when it identifies that really you're kind of just running a search, some eval and stats. So if you could, it's not saying you will be able to use T-stats, but just as you might want to check out to see whether you can use T-stats. That whole piece of logic does need refining slightly because there's obvious points. I think this was actually written before we were even getting data from Lispy. It would make much more sense to check Lispy and get that in from that way.
Sure, that would be so cool.
It's something that I'd like to do. If I stop getting myself involved in huge other projects, then maybe I'll have some time.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Well, in that case, if you want to come, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask later on, that or something comes to your head later on, then feel free to reach out. I'm happy for my details to be passed on, and we'll send the presentation out afterwards, as well as links to the dashboard as well. So, links to the app, so everyone can access that. In the meantime, I am active on the Slack channels that have already been mentioned. You can also get me on Answers and LinkedIn as well. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it useful.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.